It is now my pleasure to introduce our next speaker from Great River Energy. Mark Fagan is GRE's Vice President and Chief Corporate and Member Services Officer. He leads GRE's efforts to grow the business, including corporate and economic development and grid modernization. He oversees services to member-owner cooperatives such as demand-side management and member programs. Mark also leads GRE's business operations, communications, and human resources activity. Obviously, he is a very busy man. Last but certainly not least, Mark is also a Lake Country Power member. Please help me in welcoming Mark Fagan. We are very grateful to have him here tonight in person.
Standing, eh? Wow. Thank you, Tracy. Good evening. As Tracy said, I'm Mark Fagan, Vice President of Corporate Member Services at GRE, and more importantly, a proud Lake Country Power member. I'd like to thank Mark and his team for inviting me back to the annual meeting to speak. I guess I didn't really need an invitation to attend since I'm a member, but I did need an invitation to speak. Where's my clicker? Oh, tricky. I'm going to punk the out-of-towner, huh? All right, thank you. So tonight I'd like to give you an update on Great River Energy and our operations in 2022 and a little look ahead to the future as well. As you probably know, Great River Energy is the wholesale provider of power supply and power delivery services to Lake Country Power and 26 other member-owner distribution cooperatives located around Minnesota. And we do that through the management of $3.8 billion in assets, consisting of about 1,800 megawatts of owned generation plants, 4,400 miles of owned and operated transmission lines. And we also have an increasing amount of renewable energy in our portfolio as well, but we do that through contracts right now. And you heard earlier from Craig Olson about the 7 cooperative principles, and like Lake Country Power, GRE uses the 7 cooperative principles in our operations and keeps those things in mind as we plan our work. And as Craig mentioned, the 3rd cooperative principle is members' economic participation. And while GRE faced the same headwinds Lake Country Power faced last year with the added management of unexpectedly high natural gas prices and high power market prices in the Midwest market, strong sales due to weather resulted in a strong margin for Great River Energy. And that's where the member economic participation comes in. We were able to return $38 million to our member owners in the form of bill credits during the months of April and December, and you heard Tracy mention the amount that Lake Country Power was rebated. In addition, we achieved our equity target, and whenever we achieve our equity target at Great River Energy, we retire patronage capital in the form of a cash back to the member owners. For 2022, that was $25 million back to our member owners in patronage. That happened at the end of March, and 2022 marks the 5th year in which we've been able to return patronage to our members, totaling over $100 million. Mark Bach's Rolaids topic that I decided along with Mark maybe I'd speak a little bit about has to do with some legislative activities. So I'm sure you're well aware, especially if you attended the regional meetings, that the Minnesota legislature has been quite busy this legislative session. On February 7th, Governor Walz signed into law probably the most impactful piece of energy policy Minnesota has ever seen. I don't know if you've had a chance to read the March edition of Lake Country Power's Newsline, but on page 3 is a well-written article by Derek Mill, who's the CEO of the Statewide Trade Association for Electric Cooperatives. And in this article, Derek lays out the details of the new carbon-free standard that Governor Walz signed, and as importantly, Mr. Moe also indicates the extraordinary efforts that electric cooperative advocates and lobbyists undertook in St. Paul in January to try and get some modifications to the bill that became law to make it a more manageable piece of public policy. Amazingly enough, this bill was signed into law just a little more than a month after the legislative session started. You might be wondering what the carbon-free law means for us. So this carbon-free standard requires that each electric utility must generate or procure an amount of electricity from carbon-free technologies that are equivalent to at least the following standard percentages. And the law has written into it milestones that we need to meet as electric utilities in Minnesota. So by 2030, 60% of co-op power supply needs to come from carbon-free sources. And that was an important aspect of the negotiations that the electric co-ops did, because you'll notice by 2030, the investor-owned utilities need to provide 80% of their power supply from carbon-free sources. Then in 2035, all utilities must be 90% carbon-free, and then ultimately in 2040 and beyond, 100% of power supply from carbon-free sources. Another piece of advocacy that the co-ops did, though, was to get a modification to the bill that became law that allows utilities, including electric cooperatives like Great River Energy, to offset generation from fossil-fired resources using renewable energy credits. And that's really important for our power supply planning future, because we don't see a future without continuing to utilize our natural gas-fired peaking plants to provide reliability. But the new carbon-free standard for sure introduces a new element that we have to consider when we at Great River Energy do our power supply planning. So we have 4 elements to power supply planning. The first is maintaining our strong capacity position. And in our world, capacity means having enough power supply resources, i.e. power plants, to provide energy when it's needed all the time. And the backbone of our system is that 1,800 megawatts of owned power plants, mostly natural gas-fired peaking plants. Then we have our energy supply, which is increasingly renewable. By 2025, 1,800 megawatts of our power supply will be coming from wind energy located in North Dakota, South Dakota, Iowa, and Minnesota. But we've also, as a result of the sale of Coal Creek Station last May, have bought some of that energy back from the owner of Coal Creek Station. And so we'll be receiving that energy supply until early 2031. And then because of what's been happening in the natural gas market, we've started using natural gas hedges as a way to provide some price certainty to our exposure to the wholesale power market. A third very important element to our power supply planning is member resources. And demand-side management has the lion's share of that. So if you're a member of Lake Country Power that has an interruptible water heater, or you're on the dual fuel program, or maybe you have interruptible irrigation, or perhaps you allow Lake Country to control your air conditioner in the summer, you're providing important resources to GRE's power supply portfolio. GRE in the summertime has 360 megawatts of load that we can control through member participation in those programs, so very integral to our power supply. And then finally, the last one is market balancing, or using the market to balance our positions. So we operate our utility in the Upper Midwest power market, called the Mid-Continent Independent System Operator, or MISO, and we use MISO to buy energy when we're a little short. We sell energy into MISO when we're a little long, and so the market provides a really nice balance to help manage our power supply. But we have to remember now we're doing all these activities under the umbrella of this new carbon-free standard. So where do we think we're headed? Well, thankfully, GRE has been sort of in a decade-long evolution of our power supply portfolio, changing our power supply for economic reasons. But I think will have the attendant effect of also helping us get to meeting this new carbon-free standard. On the left side of your slide is our power supply in 2021. In 2021, 57% of our energy came from coal-fired resources, 25% from renewables. 15 years from now, in 2037, our power supply will be very different. 72% of our energy will come from wind, 7% from hydro, 16% from the market. We'll still have our natural gas-fired peaking plants in the background to start up and run them on short notice for reliability. But by 2037, with 72% wind and 7% existing hydro resources, we'll be at 79% carbon-free. That's not 100%, which we need to get to by 2040, but we're on our way, but we still have to figure out how we're going to reach that last increment. So we have a piece of public policy in place right now that we aren't able to achieve just yet, but it's something that we'll be working on over the next 17 years. Whoop, went too far there. Let's shift gears and talk a little bit about power delivery now. I mentioned that GRE owns and operates 4,400 miles of high-voltage transmission line Included in that system is about 108 bulk transmission substations that we operate and maintain with our crews as well. And then to monitor that system, we have a 24/7 system operations control room that monitors the assets that we own and operate in Minnesota, and we also have some transmission assets in North Dakota as well that we maintain and monitor. Like you heard from Mark and Tracy earlier, GRE hasn't been immune to the same power supply challenges that Lake Country and other utilities across the state and the country have seen. In particular, I think it's important to note what's been happening with lead times for critical transmission materials. You heard about lead times for distribution materials from Mark. So just looking on the far left side of that screen, the y-axis is measuring weeks of lead time. So for high voltage transmission transformers in 2020, they had about less than a 60-week lead time. Now it's over double that, 140 weeks to get a new transmission transformer. So that's 2.5 times more lead time than in 2020. And like Lake Country Power, GRE staff recently, or will in the May board meeting, take the extraordinary effort to ask for early approval for material procurement for transmission projects to support local transmission reliability out into 2024 and to 2025. Typically, we would wait until the capital budget gets approved in November for 2024 procurement, but we can't wait that long. If we're going to get these projects in 2024 and 2025 going, we have to start procuring those materials now. So just like you heard from Mark and Tracy, for now, this notion of just-in-time inventory management that we had sort of gotten used to over the years is a thing of the past. We have to look further into the future and start procuring materials now in order to stay on track with important reliability projects. Talking about looking forward into the future as it relates to transmission, Great River Energy is also collaborating with Minnesota Power to develop and eventually construct the Northland Reliability Project, which will be a 150-mile double circuit, 345 kV transmission line that will run from the Iron Range substation near Grand Rapids down to a point just west of the Twin Cities. With the scheduled retirements of Minnesota Power's Boswell Power Plant, this regional transmission project is intended to facilitate the flow of electricity from south to north, thereby enhancing reliability in northern Minnesota. Perhaps the most notable thing in my mind about this project is the route. So 130 miles of our proposed route for this line will run through or parallel existing right-of-way. 20 miles of it will replace existing 230 kV line, and 20 miles of it will replace existing 345 kV line. And finally, some of the most important and rewarding work we do is collaborating with our member owners on community and economic development. As you heard from Craig, concern for community is the 7th cooperative principle. I think you said it was your favorite one.
That's right. Give back.
And it's the guiding principle for GRE as we develop our develop and focus specifically on economic development opportunities. A great example of that right here in Lake Country Power Service Territory is a project that Lake Country Power member consumer Midstate Plastics just completed. Midstate Plastics is a family-owned business employing around 30 people in Reamer. The company specializes in plastic thermoforming and injection molding with products including air conditioner covers, shelf liners, and paint trays. Great River Energy and Lake Country Power work together to develop an energy efficiency electrification pass-through loan of $350,000 to help Midstate Plastics procure a new thermoformer. That new piece of equipment is larger and more efficient, resulting in more product produced per kilowatt hour of energy consumed. And it also has automated features, reducing physical interaction, which improves employee safety. The C3 project was the first step in a larger strategy at Midstate Plastics to modernize and expand production operations, helping this employer remain in rural Cass County. To wrap up this Great River Energy update, Great River Energy is successful because of the strength of our membership. Together, we've made some impactful changes that should position GRE well for the future. We'd like to congratulate Lake Country Power on concluding another successful year, albeit a very challenging year in the energy industry. In the spirit of concern for community, Great River Energy will donate $1,000 toward Lake Country Power's Operation Roundup. Thanks for your time and attention tonight, and please have a safe drive home.